Let's go to Canberra now. Joining us live is the Nationals MP Keith Pitt. Keith, a bit about on energy this morning I want to ask you about. AGL has announced that it will close, or will announce that it will close Loy Yang A coal-fired power plant in Victoria. That's a decade earlier than first expected. Plus, on top of that, Bayswater coal plant in New South Wales, that's to end 3 years earlier. So a few big hits there for the coal sector. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, Pete, it's great to be with you, but this is what happens when you get activist shareholders. I mean, they're going to close it and replace it with nothing. These are reliable generators that have been around for many, many years. They're incredibly affordable in terms of the electricity that they provide, and they'll replace those generators with things which are intermittent, unreliable, more expensive, require enormous amounts of transmission. I mean, you've got a transmission tower coming to your backyard at a time very, very soon if these plans go forward.
Doesn't it just show, though, that it makes no business sense to keep them running?
Oh, absolutely not. This is shorting the market as well, which drives up the price. These should be public infrastructure assets, in my view. They're critical to the country and the economy. They have worked successfully for many, many years at very affordable prices, and yet they're getting thrown down the river. I mean, it's exactly like what they're doing in Queensland, except they're owned by the taxpayer in Queensland. Well,
most of them, yeah, and I will get to that in a second. I mean, is there anything that can be done to reverse this, though?
Well, I think the state governments who have the constitutional responsibility, I mean, it's up to them to ensure that their supply is reliable and can be provided. You'll have manufacturing and big energy users absolutely departing from this country as quickly as they can if they can't get reliable supplies. They just can't be internationally competitive if they have no electricity.
Well, on to Queensland now. Your coal-rich state of Queensland will end its state-owned reliance on it by 2035. The energy sector will be overhauled by the world's biggest pumped hydroelectric plants in central Queensland. Will that work?
Mate, I've never read the Premier's statement this morning. I thought it was some sort of fantasy novel. So they're going to close coal by 2035, but they're going to keep coal open just in case they need it. They're going to transition people from very well-paid jobs to screwing solar panels on roofs at $60,000 a year. They're going to build 1,500 kilometres of transmission and then build 24-hour storage capacity dams miles away from the loads, in fact, more than 1,000 kilometres. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, Palaszczuk says we won't convert coal-fired power stations until there is replacement firmed generation. So she says that stations can simply just be turned back on. I mean, is that reasonable?
It's absolutely ridiculous. You can't let the grass grow through your plant and the rats get into it and expect you can just kick it in the middle and it'll get going. I mean, these things are owned by the taxpayer, and for a householder, mate, it's the equivalent of saying, you know, I own $1 million on my house. It'll need to be rewired in 30 years, but we'll do that now. Let's demolish it, borrow some more money, not be able to pay what we've got now. But in this case, it's the taxpayers' assets. They should be sweated for as long as they possibly can.
Well, the Premier also predicts Queensland to be 80% renewable by 2035. What sort of doubts do you have that that'll be achieved?
Well, you don't have to listen to me. You've only got to look at what's happening in Britain and Europe right now. Their prices are through the roof. I spoke to Mr Farage yesterday. I saw his presentation. They're expecting that potentially thousands of people could die from exposure because they either don't have any electricity or gas or they can't afford it this winter. I mean, that is outrageous in a modern world. Absolutely don't want to see that in Australia. It's up to the Queensland Premier to outline how they'll get this stuff to work, but it will drive up prices. There is no doubt about that because it's got to be paid for. Mate, at $64 billion, they've only put 4 on the table. I just find these concepts, it could have been written by the World Wildlife Fund or someone from Extinction Rebellion when you read the release.
Okay, in terms of renewables, for overall output, it's increased in Queensland from 19% to 21% in a year. So they do have some work to do to get that up to 80%, but I mean, it does seem marginal, but it shows that it's on the way up.
Mate, it's got to be backed up, otherwise it won't work. If you're going to transmit it around, you need thousands of kilometres of transmission lines. They have to go through people's properties, farms, in their backyard. You've only got to look at what's being proposed by federal Labor. 10,000 kilometres of transmission is Melbourne to Cape York to Melbourne, and Melbourne and almost back again by 2030.
Just a final one here, Keith. We just heard from Mark Dravis, the Attorney General. This is on the NAC, and he says he's open to having arguments about what qualifies as exceptional circumstances, although he's pretty happy with where things have landed at the moment. When it comes to public hearings, what do you think would qualify as an exceptional circumstance?
I think the exceptional circumstance he's trying to avoid here is a fight with the crossbench. And you've only got to look at what happens in New South Wales, Peter. In these types of formats, these show trials, you're politically taken out the back and shot in the back of the head before you even get going. I mean, what happened to the rule of law, the presumption of innocence, the way our justice system works? So I think the Attorney General is going to be very, very careful here, or you'll find the same thing at a federal level. I mean, all sorts of accusations get thrown around, basically none of which are true. And we'll find ourselves in a position where, once again, it's trial by media, and we've seen what's happened in recent years. OK,
and just a final one here too. The Prime Minister, he wants Optus to pay up for passports. Do you agree with him there?
I actually thought he must have had an aneurysm. It's not Labor's way. It's usually the taxpayer paying for everything. But look, data is just so serious, and all of the businesses I know are incredibly protective of it. It's almost as important as your staff. They're the ones that make sure that you are successful and profitable and keep going into the future. So I'd be very surprised if Optus doesn't come to the party, to be honest.
Yep. OK, Keith, we'll have to leave it there. Appreciate it, though.